not all wood is ready to cook on immediately. And to me, barbecue doesn't start when you get your proteins on the pit. In my opinion, barbecue starts well before that, and it starts at sourcing quality wood. For me, I cook mostly on post oak for my style of barbecue, post oak or white oak. These days, I actually have more access to white oak than I do post oak. And so I am out at the farm sourcing my wood. And when it comes to wood, I cook on a 500-gallon smoker and a 1,000-gallon smoker. And so access to quality wood is one of the, if not the most important variable that I have to account for on a weekly and a monthly and even on a yearly basis. I came out to the farm last week and I found a little plot of trees where there were some limbs hanging off of the trees that were a net negative to the main tree overall. And so last week I spent about half a day removing some of those branches off of the main tree. And my task today is to go into and to cut those up, section those up. And then over the course of the next couple days, I'll split those, stack those, and I allow that wood to season naturally. So last week I was able to get on some wood that I knew I wanted. It had every characteristic I was looking for. I'm about 99.99% certain that it's white oak. And so there's two main coves here. The one cove is up the ways a little bit. That's where I kind of lobbed off the bigger branch off of the oak tree. And then the other wood is closer to where we are now. And so that wood is dead. It's just been sitting there for a little over a year or so. And so I need to go get some of that stuff. And today's just going to be kind of one of those brute force days, you know, like barbecue can be super cerebral sometimes, I feel like, where I'm just in my head a lot about the timing and the process and the recipes and all that, kind of cerebral. And then this is the side of barbecue where I have to do zero thinking. I'm just hacking with a chainsaw a bunch of wood, loading it onto the gator, and then ultimately I'll load the trailer up and head back home to split it all up. The best, highest quality wood that I can get is wood that I age myself, or if I'm purchasing it from someone like Chief Firewood, for example, out of Texas. If I'm purchasing it, I need that wood to come to me seasoned. And so I am tasked with sourcing my own wood, with kind of triaging the inventory that I have. The wood that I'm cutting today is kind of in two categories. There's one group of logs that have a higher moisture content. Like I was saying, they came off of a tree. They're on the greener side. That wood is going to get cut, split, stacked, and set aside, likely for cooking on in next year, in 2027. And then the other bundle that I have is some wood that I like to say has naturally seasoned, if you will, just on the ground. It's not ideal letting wood season whole. I prefer to cut it, split it, stack it, put it in an enclosed environment and just allow it to naturally season. But beggars can't be choosers, so that's the plan for today. Seasoned wood burns differently than green wood, and so it's really important that I have access to wood splits that I prefer to use through the duration of a cook. You know, I'm cooking anywhere between 12 to 18 hours, give or take, with a couple sections of shut-eye somewhere in there. And so I prefer, the way that I like to barbecue, I prefer to have wood splits that are on varying degrees of moisture content. But on average, I like to err on the side of 15 to 20% moisture content from one split to the next. It's okay to have a little bit less. It's okay to have a little bit more. And frankly, I like the variability. But overall, I need to plan ahead and have access to wood splits that aren't too dry and aren't too wet. And that's kind of the dance that we dance in this barbecue thing well before we have meat going on smokers. You know, it's a common best practice in barbecue to run clean fires. And that doesn't mean that you can't pick and choose when you want to dirty your fire up a little bit here and there through the course of a cook. But overall, I think a general rule of thumb is that you're chasing a cleaner smoke flavor. And for me, how I look at that is, if I want a clean fire, Yes, that has to do with fire management and how I'm running my fire, but it really starts at the wood selection. You know, if I have greener wood, higher moisture content wood, that inherently is going to force my fire to be a little bit on the dirtier side. And that's what I don't want. You know, if I want to run a dirty fire, I want that fire to be dirty because that's how I'm running it inside my firebox. I don't want my fire to be dirty because it's pumping out high moisture content water vapors into the smoke that kind of dirties up the flavor of my smoke. What I'm chasing is a nice, natural, almost sweet essence to my fire and my smoke. And that all goes back to the wood selection. And that's kind of why the oak variety is praised, if you will. Oak runs clean if properly seasoned. Oak runs hot and consistent, but also kind of the allure of oak for me and for a lot of, you know, barbecue guys is that oak takes on kind of a sweeter flavor profile, and that comes through in a really unique and distinguished way on the end product. It's something special, unique to oak when you allow it to naturally season itself out. That split, when it begins to combust, if done right, it's a really hard flavor profile to beat. Wood is mostly cellulose, basically structural fiber, and lignin. When lignin burns, that's kind of where a lot of your smoke flavor comes from. And so, you know, having an idea for me of how I like to run fires based on the season that I'm in. You know, where I live in the Midwest, we could have 90, 100 degree days in the summer, and we can also have negative temperatures and wind chills in the winter. And all that comes into play for my wood selection. And again, I tend to be a little bit on the pickier side when I'm running my fires because I want the control, I want the variability, I want the dynamics, I want to be able to get what I want when I want it out of my wood splits. And so I like to come out to the farm, sift through all of the trees that I have access to, and kind of think with how I run my fires in mind when I'm cutting wood, splitting it, and stacking it, whether it's for immediate use or for, you know, long-term aging for subsequent years. You know, I've been asked many times, Marcus, is it okay for me to use kiln-dried wood? And kiln-dried is just a process of drying out, extracting moisture out of wood, and not a natural process. And while that's okay, I can tell you not only notice the difference in flavor, it kind of lacks that unique flavor that wood has if you let it season and age naturally, but also in the operation of your smoker. Kiln dried, it has an almost immediate combustion to it. It wicks out a lot of the moisture. And the biggest difference between letting wood season naturally versus the kiln dried is in the way that wood, those sugars in wood naturally become more prominent. If I split wood and I stow it away for a year, the moisture in the wood is going to move from kind of the center out to the edges of those splits. And that process can take a year to a year and a half, depending upon how green that wood was when you cut it. And that year-long process, that is kind of where the magic happens. Those sugars inside, those sugar compounds inside of the split, they become more distilled, they become more concentrated as the moisture is wicking itself out to the ends. And then when you throw that log on a fire and then you enact the combustion process, that flavor that becomes the smoke, the vapors, the moisture, all that whole process, that's the magic. And you kind of rob yourself of that magic if you buy kiln dry. But what I'll say is, if that's all you have access to, I'm a big proponent of getting out there, running smokers, learning the process. Just know you're probably going to eat through a little bit more wood than you want, because that wood that you're buying from an Academy or an Ace Hardware, you know, if it's coming from the store, it's going to be more on the drier side than on the more moist side. If you're going to endeavor to try to source some naturally seasoned wood, I have bought thousands of splits of wood off of Facebook Marketplace and the likes. And what I can tell you is you can either get a moisture meter. It's just a tool that you you kind of probe the end of a split. It'll read the moisture content within that specific split. That's a way to do it. But the cool thing about barbecue and the cool thing about learning this art and this craft is that over time, the real moisture meter are these two. These two God-given moisture meters right here, you know, over time, I have a feel for wood. And anyone can adopt that. Any good pitmaster that's been around, fires and been around barbecue for long enough, they can pick up any average split and tell you, maybe not exactly the moisture content, but they can tell you how that specific split is going to run inside of the fire. You know, there's the old trick where you knock two pieces of wood together. If it sounds hollow, that's going to be more of a drier wood. And if it sounds dense, that's going to have a higher moisture content. But you don't even have to do that. You can simply just pick two splits up and you can feel one's going to be heavier, potentially one's going to be lighter, and that's going to tell you how that fire is going to receive that specific split. And so when it comes to fire management, on my end, I am always balancing lighter splits versus heavier splits, i.e. drier or higher moisture content, because that's going to determine the flavor and the smoke output that I want at any given time during the cook. Properly seasoned wood just simply sounds different, it feels different, it cooks different, and it doesn't take a long time to really understand that principle. It's really just a game of time and feel and usage under the shovel, as I like to say. You know, fire management, it gets all the attention, but fire starts long before the flame. It starts with wood. The time, the patience, the sourcing, it's all really important to the overall flavor and quality of your barbecue. You know, good barbecue, it's patient. Good barbecue is patient. And that's no different from, you know, today, from sourcing wood, knowing that it's going to take upwards of a year before I can utilize the wood that I'm out here cutting today, all the way out to seasoning my proteins, giving the proteins that are on the smoker the love and attention that they deserve, and then finally serving people the food that means so much to us through the process of live fire cooking. Good barbecue, good smoke, it's patient.